Content warning. This episode includes the discussion of murder.
It's been a while since we have covered the Idaho murders on the murder sheet. We've gotten some requests to look into some of the recent updates in that case. And so we spent some time poring over some of the latest filings, and we're going to talk about what we found. My name is Anya Kane. I'm a journalist.
And I'm Kevin Greenlee. I'm an attorney.
We first connected while looking into the Burger Chef murders, an Indiana cold case. Together, we built a spreadsheet documenting hundreds of cases of restaurant-related homicides. That original spreadsheet gave way to our podcast, The Murder Sheet.
Now we maintain that same research-centric, investigative approach as we look into all sorts of homicides, including unsolved cases, historical crimes, and, of course, restaurant murders.
We don't just chat about the headlines. Our podcast is a platform for our journalism. The Murder Sheet focuses on investigative reporting, thoughtful analysis, thorough research, and in-depth interviews.
We're the Murder Sheet, and this is
the University of Idaho murders, testimony, legal support, and the gag order.
I would say that in recent weeks, the biggest issue that's caught people's attention about this case is some court filings involving Bethany Funk. Basically, the defense wanted her to testify at the preliminary hearing. And so that raises a couple of questions. First of all, what the heck is a preliminary hearing? Who is Bethany Funk? Let's talk about the preliminary hearing first. In Idaho, they have these court proceedings called preliminary hearings. So a preliminary hearing is basically a court proceeding that happens after a person has been arrested and charged, but before the actual trial. The purpose of this hearing is to determine whether or not probable cause exists. In other words, the prosecutor in this proceeding needs to show first there's probable cause that a crime has been committed, and further, that there is probable cause to support the idea that the defendant actually committed that act. In other words, is there probable cause to support the charge against the defendant? And so this is basically an opportunity for the prosecutor to present at least some of the evidence they have on hand in order to convince a judge, not so much that the defendant is guilty, but that there's probable cause to support the charge against the defendant. In some way, it's like a mini trial because evidence is going to be presented. We're going to get a look at some aspects of the case against him. But it's important to remember that it is not a trial. The ultimate issue here is in the preliminary hearing is not the guilt or innocence of Bryan Kohberger. The ultimate issue is there probable cause to hold him for this crime, to charge him with this crime? So evidence will be presented, it will be evaluated, but his guilt or innocence is not an issue.
Understood.
So that's what a preliminary hearing is. The other question is, who is Bethany Funk? Bethany Funk is one of the people who was in the house in Idaho at the time of the murders.
And she's been named widely in the popular press at this point, so that's why we're naming her as well, because her name is everywhere.
Her name is out there, and obviously she was one of the two people in that house who survived The other one was the woman referred to in the PCA is DM. She is the witness who actually had a rather terrifying encounter with the killer on the night of the murders.
So what you're saying is that Bethany Funk is not DM, the person who says they saw the killer, or the person in a mask kind of rushing out of the house.
That's correct.
Bethany Funk instead had a different experience, one that did not involve apparently necessarily laying eyes on the killer.
Exactly. And that is interesting because in these court filings, the attorneys for Kohberger have indicated they believe that Bethany has information that could be exculpatory towards Kohberger. In other words, they believe she has evidence which might help his defense.
We don't know what that is, though.
We don't know what that is, and we'll speculate a little bit in a few minutes. But that's what the gist of this is about. Can she be forced to come and testify in person at this preliminary hearing? So the question everybody wants to know is, what information could she potentially have that would be relevant? We know she was in the house at the time of the killings. Now, it's important to point out that the killings happened on the second and third floor of the house. Witness DM had her encounter with the killer on the second floor. Bethany lived on the first floor. And according to Ashley Banfield of News Nation, Bethany remained on the first floor throughout the killings and the following morning and did not actually even view the crime scene.
So it sounds like just on the surface, she may have been less of a crucial witness for the prosecution, at least.
Yeah, and it's got me curious. I went back to the PCA in this case because, as we all remember, the PCA laid out the case that the law enforcement and prosecution had against Kohberger. They spelled out the important, crucial witnesses and testimony against him. Bethany is mentioned a couple of times in this PCA. And so I'm going to go and read those references to her, and we can speculate and discuss them from there. As part of the investigation, numerous interviews were conducted by Moscow Police Department officers, Idaho State Police detectives, and FBI agents. 2 of the interviews included BF and DM. Both BF and DM were inside the King Road residence at the time of the homicide and were roommates to the victims. BF's bedroom was located on the east side of the first floor of the King Road residence. Based on numerous interviews conducted by MPD officers, ISP detectives, and FBI agents, as well as my review of evidence, I have learned the following. On the evening of November 12, 2022, Chapin and Kernodle are seen by BF at the Sigma Chi house on the University of Idaho campus at 735 Nez Perce Drive from approximately 9 p.m. on November 12th to 1:45 a.m. on November 13. BF also estimated that approximately 1:45 a.m. Chapin and Kernodle returned to the King Road residence. BF also stated that Chapin did not live in the King Road residence, but was a guest of Kernodle. Then there is a paragraph that follows that in which there is no references to Bethany, and then she is referred to again. DM and BF both made statements during interviews that indicated the occupants of the King Road residence were at home by 2 a.m. and asleep, or at least in their rooms, by approximately 4 a.m. There's then a couple of pages where she is not referred to, and then she is referred to for what I believe to be the final time in the PCA on page 5. The combination of DM's statements to law enforcement, reviews of forensic downloads of records from BF and DM's phone, and video of a suspect video is described below, leads investigators to believe the homicides occurred between 4 a.m. and 4:25 a.m. The first thing that jumps out at me from there is Bethany has obviously been cooperating with police. She let them download materials from her phone. She gave interviews about her observations.
Yes.
What jumps out from you?
I think that what you just said is important, because just because the defense thinks she's important for their case doesn't mean that that's something that, she necessarily has control over. And I think compared to witness DM, I said this before, but it's very obvious that she's not as crucial a player to the prosecution's case here. She's basically kind of filling in some details. A lot of this doesn't sound super crucial, I guess.
She seems to have seen the victims before the crime, where they were at before the crime. She verifies they were home by a certain time. Doesn't really seem, at least based on what's in the PCA, doesn't really seem to have any crucial insights about the crime itself.
Yes. Now, with a PCA, of course, it's not a trial itself, and it very much reflects the prosecution and police's viewpoint. So there's, of course, going to be a ton of information left out of a PCA that maybe goes towards a more exculpatory thing for Kohberger, or maybe leads down a different trail. So it's not to say that she has no relevant information. It's just that it's very obvious that it's not too important to the prosecution, because I imagine a lot of things she's saying are borne out by cell phone records and social media app data points. It's good stuff to have. It's good information, but it's not super crucial.
Yeah, all we really know about her story is a few basic points.
Yeah.
Like the time the victims arrived, the time they were at somewhere earlier. There's all sorts of potential detail around that she may have that we don't know.
That's very true. What becomes the big question is, what exactly is her story, and why does the defense feel it's helpful? What possible facts could she have that could be exculpatory for Bryan Kohberger? We don't know that. We likely won't know that for a while, but I guess if we can delve into a little bit of speculation, I think it's always possible that, she heard, possibly saw something that pointed in another direction. Whatever that may be, as vague as that sounds. Maybe she heard voices outside, and it seemed to be a conversation that would again maybe go towards somebody that the victims knew rather than a possible stranger in the form of Kohberger. It will become not a matter of, I don't think, like who's more credible, because I think both surviving roommates, or housemates rather, seem to me to be just people who are just experiencing very young people who are experiencing an unimaginable tragedy and have gotten roped into something that's horrific and morbid and huge and overwhelming, when they're very young. And my heart goes out to both of these girls, by the way. It's not about who's more credible, though. It's just about like what is more relevant to the actual facts of the case and the crime scene and the other evidence. Because I could see a situation where you have one witness who sees the person who seems to be the killer masked leaving, and then maybe somebody else hears like a fight outside, and they both like report that to police. But maybe one is more relevant, and maybe the other one can be explained by it was just something totally unrelated. But at the same time, with the defense, they're looking at getting Kohberger acquitted, ensuring that he's not convicted. And so they're going to be looking for that. Well, is there an alternative explanation? Can we perhaps point away from Kohberger and find something else, another story to tell a jury that they could buy?
And I think it's also important to point out that just because the defense says they believe that this witness may have exculpatory evidence, it may not necessarily be true. There may be something in a statement of hers that they read that is ambiguous and that could be interpreted more than one way. And if you interpret it in this fashion, it's exculpatory. If you interpret it in this fashion, maybe it's just irrelevant. And if that's the case, of course, it's their duty to go and try to figure out what exactly it was meant and to clarify it. Now, Bethany's attorney indicated that she did not want to be forced to go to Idaho to testify in this preliminary hearing. I think that is understandable.
Mm-hmm. Given the amount of trauma that this event would have caused somebody, she lost her friends. I presume she's transferred somewhere else or is left Idaho for that reason.
And to be at the center of what was sure to be a media circus, I don't think anybody would really want to do that.
Especially since I'm sure if she believes, I don't know this, but if she believes the prosecution's case, this person did kill my friends and housemates, then I imagine there's a lot of, obviously she has to be a part of this in the pursuit of justice, but that can't be easy knowing that like something I say, what my story may end up helping the person who I believe is the killer. I mean, I'm speculating. I don't know what her opinions are on Kohberger, but I just imagine in a situation like that could be the case.
Yeah, and exactly. And also, like I say, there's a lot of very easily imaginable reasons why she wouldn't want to be forced to do this. Her attorney took the position that this is not a trial. This is not about guilt or innocence. It's just about probable cause.
The attorney said a preliminary hearing is not meant to become a mini trial due to its limited purpose in deciding of probable cause. You just said that it was a mini trial.
It's similar to a mini trial
Mm-hmm.
in that there's going to be evidence presented.
Right.
It's not a trial in that it's not about guilt or innocence. It's just about evaluating evidence.
Right.
Does probable cause exist? Does it not exist?
That makes sense. So you can see both sides of it, but I think in a case, especially one so serious with Kohberger facing, an extreme charge, it sort of makes sense to err on the side of protecting the defendant's right to a fair trial here, even if that's difficult.
In any case, the two sides worked out a compromise. She is not going to be forced to go to Idaho to offer testimony in the preliminary hearing. She has agreed to speak with Kohberger's defense attorneys, where she now resides in Nevada.
Mm-hmm.
So that seems like a reasonable compromise. She's
Yeah.
not going to be inconvenienced and forced to travel into the heart of this media circus, but she does agree to give them the information they want and the information they seek.
That does seem like a reasonable compromise because, again, this is a very young person. Obviously, this is going to be intensely emotional and traumatic. And obviously, the defense needs this information. So having it be done away from perhaps the cameras and away from all the noise around this case makes a lot more sense.
And presumably, if the information she has truly is potentially exculpatory or is potentially useful in determining Kohberger's innocence or guilt, I would expect to see her testify at his trial, whenever that might be.
Mm-hmm. And then, of course, there's the issue of money.
Yes, everything seems to come down to money in life, whether we wanted to or not. Money and time and resources. And those of you who also follow the Delphi case recognize that sometimes it can be difficult for the prosecutor in a relatively small county to have the time and the resources to prosecute a case like this in the manner it should be handled.
Yeah, to talk about Delphi, very high profile case nationally, I would say internationally, and certainly here in Indiana. Where it's happening is Carroll County, which is a very small county. It's not a rich county. And prosecutor Nick McClelland has been essentially seemingly forced at times to go to Delphi City Council and ask for more funds, ask for more help in terms of personnel. He's constantly getting pushback. It makes a lot of us watching the case very uncomfortable because we think that the case is very important. The that justice for Libby and Abby, the two victims in the case, is very important. And we hate to see things it just takes on a ridiculous, like, nickel and diming quality when you're just wondering, is there no way to ensure that Nick McClelland has the resources he needs to do a good job here and hire the people he needs to hire and have the expertise he needs to do a good job on this.
And it's interesting in situations like this to see how other jurisdictions handle the matter. And in a moment, Anya is going to read to you from a filing prepared by the prosecutor in this case. He filed it on April 24th of this year.
Comes now the Latah County prosecuting attorney William W. Thompson, Jr., and pursuant to Idaho Code 312603B and 6714017, petitions this court for the appointment of Special Assistant Attorneys General, and in support of this request states, 1. I am the duly elected Latah County prosecuting attorney. 2. I have the duty to prosecute all felony criminal actions committed in Latah County, pursuant to Idaho Code 312604, as prosecuting attorney. 3. I petition this court to appoint Deputy Attorney General Jeff Nye and Deputy Attorney General Ingrid Beatty as Special Assistant Attorneys General to assist in the prosecution of State v. Kohberger. 4. I seek assistance in this case in order to utilize the expertise and additional resources of the Office of the Attorney General. 5. The Attorney General's office has agreed in writing to assist the Latah County Prosecuting Attorney's Office in this matter. Pursuant to the written agreement, the Attorney General's office agreed to pay the salaries of its personnel who assist in the prosecution.
And the judge granted that motion that same day. And let me state the obvious, I think this is a terrific move.
Yeah.
If you're a county prosecutor handling a case of this magnitude, while you're still supposed to be handling all of the routine responsibilities of your job, it makes sense to ask for help. It makes sense to tap into additional resources that may be available to you.
Then the case also benefits from the best of both worlds. On the one hand, you have the local authorities calling the shots. They know how things work. They're familiar with the system locally, with the ins and outs. They have a relationship with local law enforcement. So they bring all of that expertise, all that on-the-ground knowledge to the forefront. And then the outside special assistant attorneys general are essentially bringing in perhaps some other relevant experience. Maybe they've worked on some high-profile cases before, or maybe they're just there to really just ensure everything runs smoothly and they have enough personnel to really be able to manage the law enforcement and judicial process in this county without sacrificing on the quality of prosecution for Kohberger's trial. Because I think people tend to forget this. As people who are interested in true crime, we all tend to focus on the cases that interest us, the cases that speak to us and frighten us and move us, and we want to know all about them and we focus on them. But there's, having a high-profile case happen in your community does not, put a pause on crime. All the local people who are, drug dealers are not going to just say, well, okay, we're not going to deal drugs anymore because they've got that Kohberger thing to deal with. Life goes on. Things keep happening, and you have to ensure that you're doing a good job with those everyday cases too, because that also is a matter of public safety and quality of life for people in the community. So of course you're going to you can't just focus on one thing. That's just not how the criminal justice system works. This is a best of both worlds solution because it allows the additional manpower without costing, this county a ton of money. You'd want to think that money's no issue in any of these high-profile cases because it shouldn't be about the money, but practically it sometimes can be a hindrance to prosecution when, you don't have enough money to hire extra assistants and whatnot. So I was really happy to see the statewide authorities cooperating so well with the local authorities here. Seems like a really good move. I hope it happens in Delphi too and any other cases that need it.
Yeah, I'll admit, reading this, I just kept on thinking it would be great if this would happen in Delphi.
And it's not because, it's just because publicly the local authorities in Delphi have essentially been asking for money and seemingly running up against a lot of roadblocks with the Delphi City Council. And I think a lot of us on the outside are like, what? Like, what is going on? But in this case, something good is going on because this is a good cooperation.
The final thing we want to mention really quickly is there is a hearing coming up in the Idaho case in a few weeks, and it is basically going to focus on the gag order in the case. One of the victims' families is indicated they feel the gag order is too strict, and they'd like to feel free to comment on some aspects of the case publicly, which they are now not allowed to do. And again, this is a difficult issue because you can understand why the prosecutor there wants to try to keep control of the case, wants to try to ensure that nothing prejudicial happens. But there are always First Amendment issues, there's public right to know issues, and there's also issues where if something awful happened to someone who was important to me, I'd want to be able to go out and talk to the world about it and discuss my thoughts and my feelings about how the investigation was handled, how things were going, all of that.
That's a very good point. It's definitely a complicated issue. This is Kaylee Gonsalves's family, I believe, who is contesting this. She, of course, is one of the 4 victims, and her family in particular was very vocal in the run-up before Kohberger was named as a suspect and the gag order came down. They were also very critical of law enforcement and authorities around this case, and, seemingly were frequently sort of giving votes of no confidence around this. Obviously, a very charged situation, a very charged topic, and I can understand why they want to fight it. I can also understand why the prosecutor doesn't want people running out onto the news and talking about this, especially if they have inside information. I can definitely understand that.
Yes. And of course, we are also dealing with the gag order in the Delphi case. There's just a lot of parallels between these two cases.
Yeah, there is. I think I can understand a gag order to a certain extent. I tend to prefer freedom of speech and, letting people talk, but not everybody is media trained, frankly. And not everybody is able to maybe communicate what they need to without necessarily potentially revealing sensitive details that would not be helpful to a case.
I think in the ideal world, you would work out carefully constructed gag orders. In the Delphi case, you have a very broad gag order. I think is far too restrictive.
Oh, yeah, that's over the top.
On the other side of the ledger, you wouldn't want to have anybody can go out and say anything they want about anything at any time, even people who have top secret information about the case and the investigation. That also isn't desirable. But it seems to me you could carefully tailor something to protect the case while still allowing the public to have basic information about what's going on and while still allowing family members to feel like they have a voice in the process and a voice in the ongoing public conversation about the fate of their loved ones. On some level, it doesn't seem just that you and I, who never met these people, who never met these victims, can sit here and talk about the case while the people who are most directly affected by their deaths cannot.
Agreed. Although I will say, just seeing it from the other side, I think I'm so risk averse that if I were in a position like this and I had a family going out and basically bashing investigators on the television, I'm just looking at that as a huge red flag as far as the defense picking up on that goes eventually. And I'm going to be considering that when I'm thinking about what sort of gag order to craft. And I'm not blaming the family. I mean, again, it's an incredibly heartbreaking and charged situation for them. It's not something they can talk about in an emotionless and calculated and robotic way. It's their daughter, it's their sister. But you often kind of use the analogy that's frequently used. You don't want a surgeon who is going to be emotional about doing an operation on you. And you don't want a lawyer who is going to be, in this case, a prosecutor who's going to be making decisions just based on what's nice and cathartic for people. You want them to be serving justice and speaking for those who can't speak for themselves anymore, the victims in this case. So I think sometimes you have to make decisions that are not based on emotion. They're more based on what is going to be strategically relevant.
Well said, and we will certainly be keeping an eye on what happens in that hearing. Thanks so much for listening to the Murder Sheet. If you have a tip concerning one of the cases we cover, please email us at murdersheet@gmail.com. If you have actionable information about an unsolved crime, please report it to the appropriate authorities.
If you're interested in joining our Patreon, that's available at www.patreon.com/murdersheet. If you want to tip us a bit of money for records requests, you can do so at www.buymeacoffee.com/murdersheet. We very much appreciate any support.
Special thanks to Kevin Tyler Greenlee, who composed the music for the Murder Sheet, and who you can find on the web at kevintg.com.
If you're looking to talk with other listeners about a case we've covered, you can join the Murder Sheet discussion group on Facebook. We mostly focus our time on research and reporting, so we're not on social media much. We do try to check our email account, but we ask for patience as we often receive a lot of messages. Thanks again for listening.